The daughter of a former Iranian minister lives in New York. Her father just publicly endorsed a fatwa calling for the assassination of the President of the United States, and no one in the mainstream media is really talking about it. So we will. Manouchehr Mottaki. Most Westerners don't know this name. And that is exactly the problem, because this man is no stranger to the corridors of Iranian power. He served as foreign minister of the Islamic Republic from 2005 to 2010 under the presidency of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, one of the most radical regimes in Iran's recent history. He remains today an influential figure, respected and listened to within Tehran's decision-making circles. This is not a retiree talking into the void. When Mottaki opens his mouth, it is the ideological heart of the Iranian regime speaking. So what exactly did he say? In a Persian-language interview broadcast on Iranian television and reviewed by journalists, Mottaki not only endorsed a religious fatwa calling for the assassination of Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he described it as a courageous and significant act. Courageous. Significant. Words carefully chosen. This is not a throwaway political statement. This is not a political metaphor. It is the public validation, by a former senior government official, of a call for murder against a sitting American president. But here is where the story becomes genuinely staggering. While her father delivers this kind of speech in Tehran, his daughter, Zahra Assadi Nazari, lives in New York, not in Iran, not in a country allied with Tehran, in New York, the city that symbolizes the United States itself. And she doesn't live there alone. She is settled there with her husband, Nasser Assadi Nazari, who holds the position of third counselor at the permanent mission of the Islamic Republic of Iran to the United Nations. Let that sink in for a moment. The father publicly endorses a fatwa to kill Trump. The daughter lives in the city Trump long called home. And the husband is officially accredited by the Iranian government to represent that same regime at the heart of American international institutions. It is Kafkaesque, and it is real. One might be tempted to call this an unfortunate coincidence, an isolated anomaly, but that would mean ignoring the broader context, because this case is not unique. Last January, Emory University in Georgia was forced to terminate Fatemeh Larijani, the daughter of Ali Larijani, one of the most powerful figures in the Islamic Republic, former Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, and longtime advisor to the Supreme Leader. This woman was teaching at Emory School of Medicine, one of the most prestigious universities in the United States. She was only dismissed after public protests, after people found out who she was and who her father was. Without that public pressure, she would still be training America's future doctors. This is a pattern, not a coincidence. The elites of the Iranian regime, those who have spent decades orchestrating a foreign policy built on terror, the funding of Hezbollah, attacks on embassies, documented assassination attempts against dissidents in exile, these same elites send their children to live, study, and work in the West. While their fathers call for Trump's death in the name of God, their sons and daughters enjoy American freedom, its universities, its cities, its security, and the United States allows it. Why? Because diplomatic status provides protection, because institutions operate on precedent, because no one wants to create a diplomatic incident by expelling the third-ranking counselor of a UN mission. But when that counselor is the son-in-law of a man who just publicly endorsed the assassination of the American president, the question deserves to be asked out loud. Is international law being used as a shield by a regime that respects none of its rules? We need to understand what a fatwa means in this specific context. It is not simply a religious opinion. When Iran's supreme leader, or a religious authority close to the regime, issues a fatwa against someone, it has historically led to concrete execution attempts. The most famous example is Salman Rushdie, condemned to death by Khomeini in 1989 for his novel The Satanic Verses. Rushdie spent decades in hiding and was ultimately stabbed in 2022 at a conference in the United States, on stage, in front of hundreds of witnesses. Iran never officially lifted that fatwa. That is what such a religious ruling concretely means within the doctrine of the Iranian regime. It is not symbolic, it is an invitation to murder. And Mottaki called it courageous. Meanwhile, At the United Nations Security Council, Iranian Ambassador Saeed Iravani had the audacity to tell American envoy Mike Waltz to be polite during a heated session that took place in late February 2026. Think about that. The representative of a regime that just validated a fatwa to kill the American president is lecturing the American ambassador on manners. It is a calculated provocation, a display of contempt. And Waltz's response was exactly what the moment demanded. He said, paraphrasing closely, "I am not going to dignify that with a response, especially coming from a representative of a regime that has killed tens of thousands of its own citizens and imprisoned thousands more, simply because they wanted to be free. It may be one of the rare times an American diplomat said precisely what needed to be said, without diplomatic padding, without protocol. But let us return to the heart of the matter, because behind these diplomatic tensions, behind the fiery declarations and the heated sessions at the UN, there is a fundamental question that Western governments refuse to confront directly. Can we continue to treat normally with a regime whose senior political figures publicly endorse calls for the murder of elected leaders while allowing their families to enjoy the protection of American soil? That question is not rhetorical. It has very real legal, security, and moral implications. On the legal front, the presence of an Iranian diplomat whose father-in-law just publicly supported a threat against the American president should, at minimum, trigger a review of his accreditation. On the security front, American intelligence has documented on multiple occasions Iranian operational attempts on American soil, including plots to assassinate dissidents, journalists, and even American officials. The line between the diplomatic mission and enemy intelligence, in Iran's case, is extremely porous. And on the moral front, there is something fundamentally indecent about allowing the children of those who advocate for the destruction of the West to peacefully enjoy everything the West has to offer. This is not about collective punishment. This is not about guilt by association. It is about coherence. If a state officially designates Iran as a state sponsor of terrorism, if its intelligence services document assassination attempts on its soil, if its leaders are explicitly targeted by fatwas endorsed by former ministers, then the presence of those same ministers' families in its cities is not an administrative detail. It is a contradiction that demands an answer. Fox News Digital contacted the Iranian mission to the United Nations for a response. Silence. No comment. The American mission to the UN had also not responded at the time of publication. That silence on both sides is itself revealing. No one wants to touch this subject. No one wants to open this box, because the moment you lift the lid, it exposes layers of institutional complacency, untenable diplomatic precedents, and hypocrisies that have accumulated over decades of American-Iranian relations. What is happening right now in the Middle East, the American-Israeli strikes, Operation Epic Fury, the questions surrounding the future of the Iranian regime, all of it forms a context in which these revelations take on an even more explosive dimension. While bombers strike targets in Iran, while bunkers are destroyed, while Trump orders the Revolutionary Guards to surrender, the son-in-law of a man applauding the fatwa against Trump sits in an office in New York, accredited, protected, untouchable. The story of Zahra Assadi Nazari and her husband is not a footnote. It is a mirror held up to decades of American foreign policy that believed it could maintain some form of dialogue, some pragmatic coexistence with a regime whose foundational doctrine is hostility toward everything the United States represents. And that mirror reveals something uncomfortable. This strategy has produced absurd situations, living contradictions, settled in New York apartments, accredited by the United Nations, and shielded by the very rules their government openly despises. The question is no longer whether we can afford to ignore these facts. The question is how much longer we are going to pretend we don't see them.